Hey everybody, and welcome to the D&D podcast. Now, if my microphone sounds a little bit different this time, it's because I actually had to rent a microphone for a project I'm doing, and I figured, while I have a good quality microphone, I might as well record at least one episode of this. Now, I don't have a written script usually, but I do have stories I generally have in mind. So what I'm going to do here is kind of preface an introduction to more of a series of stories I'm planning on telling, at least. It follows the Waterdeep group that I may have talked about them more in depth than I'm currently thinking of before, but we continued their game, and so what happened is we played the game Waterdeep Dragon Heist. It's one of the books by Wizards of the Coast. Very fun game. A lot of people have mixed opinions on it because, well, there's not too much story content, and most of the time you're just going to be doing your own thing anyway. It's basically for the most part, it's a homebrew actual game made by Wizards of the Coast, where you can interject your own things, and it really doesn't affect the story too much as long as you stick to the milestone system. So, in that game, there were 4 characters. There was a wizard, a monk, a dragonborn, who I always forget the class of, just remember that she is a dragonborn, and a necromancer, which is a homebrew class, which is basically just the wizard with some more focus on necromancy, instead of just taking the subclass of necromancy. And they all met at the Troll Skull Tavern. That's where they end up at. The Yawning Portal Tavern. There was an event. I won't really spoil the events of Waterdeep. I'm sure none of you really care. But I won't go too far into that. At least not right here. Now, they all met up. They became fairly good friends. It was a little forced at first, but they were pretty happy with each other by the end, and a lot of essential NPCs that were not, in the book that I just put in there, they got very attached to. I remember even the necromancer, who is also a skeleton, by the way, on another homebrew race. He actually had a pet were-rat, and her name was Nezarin, but that's a whole nother story. So after we finished the Waterdeep campaign, we took a long break because our group was kind of split up. We meet up every now and then because we happened to be in the same place for a while, but then we're split up again. So we took a pretty extended break, but since that was like our first really successful campaign where people were actually attached to their characters and they weren't as disposable as when we had played previous games, I did tease that, yeah, maybe I'll write just a full homebrew sequel to Waterdeep. But then I realized I probably shouldn't write my own homebrew campaign because the last time we did that, it was very fun, but it was a completely different experience than what I would have wanted to do again, at least with these characters. Because in this group, the last time I ran a homebrew campaign, I guess that was the third time. The first time I ever ran a game in general was a homebrew campaign with this group, and there were 2 sequels to that game. And that was the last time I ever ran a fully homebrew game, period. Because first of all, it killed me to write. It took so long, and I don't have that kind of time anymore, unfortunately. And if I did, it's just exhausting. I mean, I loved it. I was extremely proud of it. I still have all my notes if I ever need to rerun it, but it was exhausting to make an entire world that was fully fleshed out with all these side quests, all this story, all this lore, these main quests, these NPCs. It was a lot. But that's a common thing when you're making an entire campaign. Anyway, last time I did that, it was more of because of how tough the game was going to be, they were going to start at level 1, we would play for, some months, some years. It would end at level 20. It was like a high magic, high quick leveling up sort of thing. It only took us a couple months to complete it, thanks to a decision I will never make again of implementing the deck of many things, which leveled them up quicker because their luck was insane with that thing. Except for one character who instantly died, but that was different. I think I have talked about that story before. Anyway, so I didn't. If I ever made another game, especially for those characters, I would not want it to be fully homebrew, because knowing myself, I would up the scale. I would escalate everything a little bit more than it already was. That's what we. I think that's what we kind of loved about the first Waterdeep game. Like, the stakes really weren't that high in the long run. It was so character-focused and character-driven, character-developed. Like, if they lost the Waterdeep game, probably there would be, like, some rippling effects across just the city. But that's about it. There were no world-ending stakes. There were no... I guess there was a dragon, but that's later on in the game. And also optional, kind of. There's really not much, like, that you would tell a story about. Well, at least, like, your stories won't be told across the land of the Waterdeep group. It's not like it's the Tomb of Annihilation where you're gonna save all the undead and kill the Lich King of Sirac. No, it's just you're trying to stop a heist from Xanathar the Beholder. But, and like, yeah, that has some pretty high stakes. Xanathar is a crime boss, and if he gets all that money, then the people who own that, who were decent people, would be broke, and his crime syndicate would expand significantly. But, the world would still be fine. Some level 20 adventurers could probably take him out after several rounds of different people coming in. But yeah, to do a sequel, I wouldn't want to do it myself. So I looked for other material, and the very first thing that caught my eye was, at the time, the Kickstarter Grim Hollow. I thought that would be perfect, because it would go pretty well with some of their character backgrounds, such as... Well, at least I would get to play with them a little bit more. Like, for example, the necromancer I mentioned earlier, who had the pet were-rat, because he was a skeleton. The people of Waterdeep were relatively accepting of, like, different races and stuff, but the people of Grim Hollow would be terrified of him, and even him showing his face could have significant problems and ramifications in the future. So he would have to hide himself, disguise himself with a mask and all these clothes, which would probably look very suspicious, and there would be other ramifications with that, but probably not as severe as a skeleton showing up where people are afraid of the undead. But that was just one example, and that's kind of why I fell in love with the setting. And at the time, though, it was still just a Kickstarter. And at one point, it eventually did come out, and I was able to get a PDF version of it, because I was not going to pay that much for that book when it came out. And I looked over it, and I really enjoyed it, but because of some events that were happening around the time, I didn't get to look over it as much as I would have wanted to, and I didn't really have time to prepare and implement it. Even now, I don't think I've read it from front to back, which I do feel kind of bad about, because what I have read, I have absolutely loved. The lore is very deep. The towns are intriguing. And the entire area is really a great place to run a game. Especially since, at the end of Waterdeep, you're not supposed to be higher than level 5. They would be perfect for this environment. I mean, you're not supposed to start at level 5 in Grim Hollow, but... I mean, you're not really having much benefit by starting at that level, because everything can still really overpower you. So after a while, some time passes, and I think Christmas comes around. And something I happened to get for Christmas was the book Descent into Avernus. And I was very intrigued by this book as well. I was really looking forward to it coming out. I've heard all about the vehicles that they were implementing. I thought that sounded extremely cool. And I read it, actually, like front to back, and I was like, I think I can do this too. So it came down to a decision for me between Grim Hollow and Descent into Avernus. And initially, I chose Grim Hollow. But then there was a very large problem. Why would they go there? They have literally no reason to go to Grim Hollow. I tried to think of any explanation that I could have, and the only one that worked out would be if I had an extreme railroad for like the first 15 minutes of the session to get them there. Like, take full control of their characters, do some things exactly a certain way, and then they would just be stranded there. And that was my plan. So, instead of doing that, and for a little, one thing about me, I know I've mentioned this before, but I hate railroading. I love just basically plopping my adventures into a fantasy world that either I or Wizards of the Coast or someone else has created, and just basically saying, all right, go have fun. What you gonna do? I know a lot of people disagree with that, and other people, say a little bit of railroading is good. It's not like I've never used it. I just really prefer not to. And so at the end of the day, I just couldn't do Grim Hollow, at least not with these characters. We would have to have a new game that starts in Grim Hollow if we were to do that. So about 2 weeks before we started, I chose Descent to Avernus. And it had been a while since I read it, because there was a very large gap of time between when we finished Waterdeep and started Descent to Avernus. And it was around a year. It was just short of a year, but only like a couple weeks short of a year. So when we eventually got back together, we wanted naturally, pick up a new game. So it was kind of weird because we've never picked up from previous characters before, at least not after that long of a period of time. So we actually did have a refresher session that really, it reminded people of the NPCs, got people back up to pace. And it really, what really got to me is at one point the player that was the monk just said, "Oh man, I forgot how much I loved this guy." He was referring to his own character, and in some of the others as well, he mentioned that. But it was just nice to see them getting back into character, learning how to, kind of relearning who was around them, who was important. They reunited with the chef in the kitchen, they absolutely loved as a character, even though it kills my voice to do his voice. That's probably why they love him so much, if I'm being honest, just to see the strain I'm in when I do his voice. But it's always fun. And yeah, all the other NPCs, there was the dwarf that the Dragonborn had a thing for. There was Maxine, the carriage driver, Nezarin, the were-rat, and several others. And then, after our refresher session, we begun the Descent to Avernus game. But Waterdeep and Descent into Avernus weren't exactly made as a Part 1, Part 2. But the thing about Descent into Avernus is, its entire name is Baldur's Gate Descent to Avernus. But the Baldur's Gate part of that game is the first 3 chapters, and they have literally nothing to do with the rest of the game. There's one reference that's even a possibility, because this person may or may not have died in the Baldur's Gate part. That comes back later in the game. So instead of running the kind of bland and pointless Baldur's Gate portion of it, I just kind of ripped it out and said, okay, Waterdeep was the first part instead. And honestly, it was almost a seamless transition, because all I had to do was basically, I took out Baldur's Gate. I always forget the name of the city that you start in as soon as you get into Avernus. I think it starts with like a E or something. I know if I say that, I'm immediately going to be wrong. So I can't remember that. It's like ethereal. It's something along the lines of that. I just took out that city entirely, and I said it's Waterdeep now. Waterdeep got dragged into Avernus by these chains. You were in it when it happened. You saw it all happen. It actually happened because of them. Actually, once again, because of the necromancer, who was a skeleton. His whole thing was he died about 200 years ago, made a pact with Baphomet. He was brought back, basically in servitude towards him, even though, because of events, he had amnesia and didn't remember that for the longest time. He does now, but he was trying to break the pact. And he thought he found an experimental way of doing that, and he was very cautious with it, but when he eventually tested it, it kind of worked, but had some definite side effects with Waterdeep being dragged down into Avernus. And basically the way I explained it was, instead of this may be a weird explanation, and it probably goes against some kind of lore established in D&D, which I try to keep up with, but I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot of it. I do have a lot that I do in my daily life, so it's hard to keep up with everything. But my explanation was, in the Blood War, which in D&D is the war between demons and devils because they don't get along, the devils wanted to drag Waterdeep in, essentially to take the souls from it, but the demons were kind of in their way of completing that task. But when Baphomet was angered because someone in Waterdeep had broken a contract with them, they basically temporarily joined forces just to accomplish that one task of dragging Waterdeep into Avernus. And that was basically my explanation, and we started from Chapter 3. Oh, also, there is someone named Lulu the Hollyphant that you're supposed to meet in the Baldur's Gate area. I basically just shoehorned Lulu in there. It was basically, Lulu kind of came out right before the experimental contract breaker was implemented, and it because it was a gift given to them by, no, that's right, they actually found that in the dungeon, at the bottom of a dungeon. And it was definitely a plot device. When they opened it, Lulu just happened to be in there. I came up with some explanation, although I don't remember it off the top of my head. I know it's in my notes somewhere. But yeah, and after that, the transition was really seamless. It all worked very well, and also they had more of an attachment to Waterdeep because that was their home. They'd been lived there. They had been living there. They'd been working there. They've been surviving there. They've done a couple of shady things just to stay alive, but they've done a lot more to protect the city before. And yeah, it was really a great transition. Honestly, if I highly recommend, if you're going to run Baldur's Gate, to just kind of replace the first 3 chapters with a low-level adventure, so they kind of have some stake in the game other than just kind of stumbling upon this city that's in Avernus, and now you just gotta save it. It makes it their home. It makes them invested in it, and they actually did want to save it, and it was good to see them get back together trying to accomplish this. They went through a lot of trials, tribulations. I think I'll make its own video about the game itself. And it ended in an epic battle that I knew the player. I know the player who plays Greg, the skeleton necromancer, would be furious with me if I didn't talk about that final battle, so I'll definitely make that its own video. But until then, I think my moral of this video is, if you're gonna run a Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, run Waterdeep first, and after you finish that game, just kind of pick up after that with Baldur's Gate. Only just cut out the Baldur's Gate part of Descent into Avernus. it really flowed a lot better. Because, Descent into Avernus is a great book. Like, the vehicles were amazing. I love the layout, all the confusion, the puzzles, it was also pretty narratively driven as well. Not as much, it wasn't like as, it was pretty different from Waterdeep Dragon Heist in the fact that you don't have as much downtime. But this was more of a straightforward quest where you could take you had a couple different options of things to do. But it was more of a straight line where Waterdeep you could have done so many things that randomly that you could have done, and half of them weren't even in the book, so you'd have to improvise. But both were very enjoyable, and that's honestly probably going to be the send-off to those characters. Thankfully, they did survive. And if I ever pick up with those characters again, it will probably just be like the equivalent of a downtime session where, like, there's not much combat, if any. They're just interacting as their characters, which actually some of them have showed interest in doing. But I think at some point we'll pick up with another game. I might finally decide to finish reading Grim Hollow, or who knows. I also recently acquired Icewind Dale, the book, and I've actually heard very mixed things about that. So we'll see if I end up running that. I've heard it almost works better as 5 different one-shots, and I kind of see what they mean, because it basically is just 5 different one-shots in 5 different towns. But, well, there is like a kind of an overall thing to it, but that's its own thing, and I'll get into that later once I read it more in depth. But that's about all I have to say for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't get used to the actual microphone quality. It won't be here for long. And hope you all have a good day. Give this video a like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.